She didn't invite me to the wedding, but when the powerful family marrying into my daughter's life tried to use my dark past to blackmail me, I decided to burn down their future instead. The embossed invitation arrived 3 weeks late, tucked into a pile of junk mail and utility bills, as if my own daughter couldn't bear to look me in the eye while delivering the final polished blow. It wasn't addressed to me, of course. It was addressed to the occupant. A cruel, sterile designation for the woman who practically raised her, who held her through fevers and taught her how to tie her own shoelaces with those chubby little fingers. I unfolded the heavy cardstock, the cream color expensive enough to feel like an insult. There it was. Daughter's name and groom's name request the pleasure of your company. And then the guest list. My name was conspicuously absent. Not regrets, not unable to attend. Just nothing. A gaping void where a mother's presence should have been. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the morning light feeling cold and unforgiving. 7 years. 7 years of careful, agonizing silence, punctuated only by the rare, brief text message, usually related to checking on the old family dog or an inquiry about my health, that felt more like a legal obligation than genuine concern. I'd tried, I'd begged, pleaded, sent letters she never acknowledged, emails that landed in the digital abyss. I'd accepted the exile, however painful, but to be erased from the physical record of her happiest day, that stung deeper than I thought possible. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. My daughter, Chloe, was marrying a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was everything Chloe wanted: stable, wealthy, charming in a reserved, old-money way. He was a software magnate, and his family, the Thornes, were pillars of the local elite. They had pedigree, connections, and a reputation as immaculate as their sprawling estate up on Oak Haven Hill. I, on the other hand, was nobody. A divorced bookkeeper living in the same slightly cramped suburban house where Chloe grew up, a ghost in the narrative she was clearly trying to write for herself now. Chloe's explanation, delivered via a strained phone call 2 months prior, had been clipped, practiced, and utterly devastating. "Mom, please, you know how Marcus's family is. They value tradition. And frankly, your history isn't exactly conducive to the image they want to project. My history." That ghost I could never quite shake. It was ancient now, buried under decades of careful conformity. But some secrets, once released into the world, never truly retract. Chloe knew. She'd always known. And now, Marcus's powerful, judgmental family had apparently done their own digging, and Chloe had chosen them, or perhaps chosen silence, over me. I folded the invitation back up, my hands trembling slightly. I wasn't invited. Fine. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't show up unannounced and shatter their perfect day. I had my pride. Fractured though it was, I decided I would spend the wedding day volunteering at the animal shelter, somewhere loud and distracting where the weight of parental heartbreak wouldn't crush me. I even called Mrs. Henderson at the shelter and confirmed my shift. The following Tuesday, I was at the local supermarket grabbing some bland comfort food, a frozen lasagna, the kind that always burned slightly on the edges, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a spam call trying to sell me extended warranties. "Hello," I answered, juggling the cart. A voice, smooth, cultured, and possessing an unmistakable aristocratic lilt, responded. "Is this Eleanor Vance?" My breath hitched. Eleanor Vance. Not mom, not occupant. Eleanor Vance. The name felt heavy, like a key turning in a lock I thought had rusted shut. "Speaking," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. There was a slight pause on the other end, just long enough to feel like an inventory check. "Mrs. Vance, my name is Julian Thorne. I am Marcus's father." My knees nearly buckled against the metal railing of the shopping cart. Marcus Thorne's father, the patriarch, the man whose name was synonymous with old money and impenetrable social circles. Why was he calling me? "Mr. Thorne," I replied stiffly, "I assume you are calling to confirm that I understand my absence at the wedding is expected and welcome." Julian Thorne chuckled, a dry, low sound that held no warmth. "Oh, Eleanor, not at all. In fact, I'm calling because we have a rather pressing matter to discuss before the ceremony this Saturday, a matter that concerns your past and consequently our son's future." I dropped the jar of marinara sauce I'd been holding. It didn't shatter, thankfully, but the thud echoed loudly in the quiet aisle. I stared around wildly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "My past?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Mr. Thorne, I don't believe I have any relationship with your family outside of my daughter being engaged to your son, and I certainly don't have anything to discuss with you." "Ah, but you do, Eleanor," he corrected, his tone sharpening with an authority that brooked no argument. "We know exactly who you are. We know where you were 10 years ago, and we know what you did. More importantly, we know about the trust fund." The blood drained from my face. The trust fund. It was the one thing I thought I had successfully buried alongside everything else. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, poorly. "Don't insult my intelligence, Eleanor. The official records say you were in Denver for those years, working remotely. But we know the truth. We know you spent 18 months in the Swiss Alps under a different name, finalizing the transfer. And we need to know where the rest of the principal is hidden, because Marcus is not marrying into a scandal. But he is marrying into a significant inheritance if you cooperate." I gripped the edge of the cart until my knuckles turned white, the fluorescent lights buzzing mockingly overhead. The Thornes weren't just aware of my history. They had details only the most obsessive investigator, or perhaps someone intrinsically connected to the original event, could possibly possess. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mr. Thorne," I managed to hiss into the phone. "On the contrary, Eleanor," Julian Thorne purred, "I believe I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And if you don't meet me tomorrow afternoon in the private viewing room at the Fairmont Hotel, Chloe will find herself very much alone at the altar this Saturday. Not just without you, but without Marcus, too. We can make arrangements for the wedding to proceed, but only if the matter of the missing funds is resolved first." He hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in the pasta aisle, the lasagna forgotten, the name of my daughter's fiancé's father echoing in my head. A chilling confirmation that my life of quiet atonement was over, and that the powerful family marrying into my bloodline held a far more dangerous secret about me than my own estranged daughter ever knew. The Fairmont Hotel, the pinnacle of old-world luxury in this city, a place I hadn't set foot in since before everything went wrong. Meeting Julian Thorne there wasn't an invitation. It was a summons to the tribunal. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of suspended animation, cleaning the house obsessively, scrubbing away any trace of my normal, mundane life, as if a clean countertop could somehow scrub away the criminal history the Thornes seemed to have unearthed. I pulled out the old safe deposit box keys, hidden in the false bottom of my grandmother's old jewelry case. The inheritance. The Swiss Alps debacle. It had been my lifeline, the carefully laundered proceeds from a life I swore I'd left behind, a life where I wasn't Eleanor Vance, bookkeeper, but someone far more elusive, far more useful. The money was divided. Part of it had been used to disappear, to start over, to give Chloe the stability I could never offer her in my previous existence. The rest, the principal Julian Thorne was so eager to discuss, was indeed safely tucked away, enough to fund a small nation, hidden in offshore accounts under shell corporations that even I had trouble tracking sometimes. I kept it as insurance, a final emergency parachute. I never expected the man marrying my daughter to be the one holding the deployment cord. The next afternoon I dressed carefully, not in mourning, but in armor. A severe black suit, practical heels, and not a speck of jewelry save for my plain wedding band. A relic from a past life, perhaps, but still a symbol of commitment, however flawed. I didn't drive my usual sedan. I took a taxi to the hotel, leaving my car and its easily traceable license plates at home. The Fairmont lobby was all polished marble and hushed reverence. I felt like a stain on the Persian rugs. I told the concierge I had an appointment with Mr. Julian Thorne. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second too long, taking in my slightly dated attire, before he directed me to the private elevator. The elevator whisked me up 20 floors in silence, the gilded doors opening onto a plush, dimly lit hallway. A severe-looking woman in a tailored gray suit stood waiting. She nodded curtly and gestured toward a heavy, unmarked oak door. Julian Thorne rose as I entered the viewing room. It wasn't a typical hotel suite. It was clearly set up for discreet, high-level meetings. A mahogany conference table, heavy drapes sealing out the afternoon light, and two very large, very silent men standing near the exit, their posture radiating quiet menace. Julian Thorne was impeccably dressed, silver-haired, his face carved with the lines of someone who had never had to ask for anything twice. Eleanor. Punctual. I appreciate that, he said, gesturing toward a chair opposite him. I didn't sit. I kept my hands clasped in front of me. Let's skip the pleasantries, Mr. Thorne. What do you want? And how much do you know about the Sterling Syndicate? The question hung in the air. Julian Thorne blinked, a momentary flicker of surprise crossing his face before he regained his composure. He'd expected denial, perhaps tears, not a direct hit on the criminal organization I'd fled. Very observant, Eleanor. I see you haven't lost your touch, he conceded, leaning back. We know you weren't just an accountant for Sterling. You were the primary financial architect for their European acquisitions, and you were very, very good. Good enough to skim off the top when the whole thing imploded. The Sterling Syndicate wants their money back, Eleanor. Not just Marcus's fiancée's mother's forgotten inheritance. They want the $10 million you siphoned just before the collapse. My breath hitched again. $10 million. That was the number I'd been running from for a decade. Chloe's inheritance was pocket change compared to this. Why are you telling me this? I demanded, my voice tight. If you knew this, why did your family allow Marcus to become engaged to my daughter in the first place? Julian Thorne smiled, and this time the smile was genuinely predatory. Because, Eleanor, Marcus is marrying into the Thorne family, not the Vance family. We are untouchable. And Marcus, bless his naive heart, is marrying Chloe because she is quiet, beautiful, and precisely what his mother requires for their public image. But we needed leverage. We needed something to ensure that when the time came, you would be amenable. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. The Sterling Syndicate is coming back, Eleanor. They are resurfacing, looking to reclaim lost assets and silence loose ends. They know you're here. They've been tracking you for months. We just confirmed it yesterday. And you want me to use the hidden funds to pay them off? I asked, a desperate hope creeping in. If I gave them the money, maybe I could buy my freedom and Chloe's safety one last time. Pay them off? Heavens, no. That would only confirm your guilt and leave you penniless for Chloe's future security, Thorne scoffed. We want you to come back to work, Eleanor. You are an asset. You know how to move fortunes without leaving a trace. We don't want your money, we want your expertise. We need someone to manage the restructuring of Thorne Industries before the IPO next quarter. It's complex, requiring a level of financial subtlety that our current team simply doesn't possess. He paused, letting the weight of the proposition settle. You work for us, under Marcus and Chloe's umbrella. You manage the Thorne wealth, which is exponentially larger and more protected than anything Sterling could touch. In exchange, we ensure Sterling never hears about the $10 million. They get silence, we get your unparalleled skills, and Chloe gets her wedding day intact, with the full support of the Thorne family, who will suddenly find their quiet little bookkeeper daughter-in-law quite fascinating. It was a gilded cage, a Faustian bargain wrapped in silk, work for the family that rejected me, or watch my daughter's wedding implode, likely followed by my own extradition or worse. And if I refuse, I whispered, testing the boundaries. Julian Thorne snapped his fingers. The imposing man by the door stepped forward, placing a thick, leather-bound folder on the table next to my elbow. He opened it just enough for me to see the glossy, full-color photo inside. It wasn't a picture of me looking nervous in a supermarket. It was a recent, surveillance-quality photograph. Chloe, laughing, getting into a sleek black car outside her downtown office building. The car wasn't a standard sedan. It was Marcus Thorne's custom armored Bentley. Julian Thorne tapped the photo lightly. If you refuse, Eleanor, you get nothing. The Sterling Syndicate closes their file by eliminating the source of their missing funds. And since you've been living quietly under the radar for 10 years, the easiest way for them to locate you and make a statement. They target the weak link in your new life. They target the girl who thinks her mother is just a slightly embarrassing suburbanite. They target Chloe right before she walks down the aisle and make sure Marcus Thorne marries an empty seat. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier threats. The wedding is Saturday. You have until Friday noon to accept my offer and report for briefing. Choose wisely, Eleanor. Because if you don't show up at the Fairmont for your new job interview by then, I'm afraid your daughter will find out exactly why you were never invited to the wedding in the first place. The silence in the room thickened, suffocating me. I looked from the photo of Chloe, so vibrant, so unaware of the lethal chess game being played with her life, to Julian Thorne's impassive face. He wasn't bluffing. The inclusion of that recent photo, the specific mention of the armored Bentley, proved they hadn't just dug up the past. They were actively monitoring the present, ready to pivot from blackmail to execution. You want me to be your corporate ghost, I stated flatly, pushing the folder away as if it were contaminated. A highly skilled felon brought in from the cold to clean up your dirty laundry before an IPO. We prefer the term leveraging unique skill sets for mutual security, Thorne corrected smoothly. And yes, you accept the position or Chloe pays the price for your previous indiscretions. It's rather simple arithmetic, isn't it? I nodded slowly. the acceptance tasting like bile. There was no choice. A mother might be exiled, but a mother would never allow her child to become collateral damage. Friday noon, the briefing. But I need one guarantee, Mr. Thorne. Absolute written assurance that Chloe will be entirely safe and that she will not be informed about the Sterling Syndicate or my actual history under any circumstances. Thorne steepled his fingers, a triumphant glint in his eye. Written assurances are for contracts. Eleanor, this is trust, or perhaps mutual desperation. My word is ironclad on the safety of my future daughter-in-law. If anything happens to Chloe before the wedding, you will know I failed to protect her, and you can assume the Sterling Syndicate will find you immediately afterward. Conversely, if you fulfill your duties, she remains untouched, and you are folded into the Thorne dynasty as a necessary, albeit mysterious, asset. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, ensuring my loyalty not through reward, but through the threat of immediate shared disaster. If I cooperated, Chloe was safe because the Thornes needed me alive and functional. If I betrayed them, they would kill Chloe to flush me out or let Sterling handle it, which amounted to the same end result. Fine, I agreed, the word barely escaping my lips. Friday noon. But I won't be working for your son, Marcus. I will report only to you, and I will require access to the full scope of Thorne Industries' current financial vulnerabilities immediately. Thorne looked genuinely pleased. Done. Welcome aboard, Eleanor. I look forward to seeing the legendary Vance precision applied to the Thorne accounts. I turned and walked out, the heavy oak door closing behind me with a final, echoing thud. I was trapped. I was a criminal again, indebted to the very people who had once looked down on my daughter's humble origins. The rest of the week was a blur of paranoid preparation. I had to wipe my current identity clean. I couldn't risk having any digital breadcrumbs leading back to my old life, or worse, leading the syndicate to Chloe's wedding location before I could secure her. I deleted bank accounts, wiped my laptop's hard drive with military-grade software, and packed the essentials. I left a vague note for Mrs. Henderson at the shelter. Urgent family emergency. Gone away for a while. Thursday night. I couldn't sleep. The night before my forced re-entry into the underworld, I was haunted by the image of Chloe. She was so full of innocent excitement. Tomorrow she'd be walking down that aisle, blissfully unaware that her mother was securing her future by pledging herself to a network of powerful criminals, or that her fiancé's family held the strings to both their lives. I slipped out of the house just before midnight, driving to a secure, unmarked storage unit I rented years ago on the outskirts of the city, a place far removed from my suburban comfort zone. Inside, under dusty tarps, were the remnants of my previous existence, encrypted laptops, burner phones, and a single, worn leather briefcase. I opened the briefcase. It wasn't full of cash or gold bars. It contained documents pertaining to the Sterling Syndicate's most damning secrets. The evidence I'd intended to use to gain immunity, which I never needed because the collapse was sudden and chaotic. This was my real insurance policy, the nuclear option against anyone who threatened me or Chloe. As I inventoried the files, noting the encryption keys, my burner phone buzzed violently. It was an automated text message sent through a channel so obscure I hadn't used it in years. It wasn't from Julian Thorne. It was from a number associated with the Sterling Syndicate's enforcement wing. The people who specialized in making problems vanish. The message contained a single grainy photo. It wasn't a picture of Chloe this time. It was a photograph taken moments before I arrived at the Fairmont yesterday. It showed me, pulling up in the taxi, looking stressed as I adjusted my coat. and beneath the photo, a chillingly brief message. "Thanks for the reunion, Eleanor. We knew the thorns would lead us right to you. Julian's arrogance is tiresome. Tell him the price just went up. We want the 10 million and the sterling files by Saturday morning. If you show up for work at Thorn Industries, we'll assume you've chosen the wrong side." I stared at the phone, my blood turning to ice water. Julian Thorn hadn't been trying to protect Chloe by hiring me. He'd been setting a trap. By forcing me to meet him at the Fairmont, he'd confirmed my location to the syndicate, delivering me right into their hands while using the threat to Marcus's wedding as motivation. He was playing both ends against the middle, using my desperate loyalty to Chloe as the mechanism to lure out the syndicate's most wanted fugitive, me, and settle their old scores simultaneously. The wedding was Saturday. I now had less than 48 hours to satisfy a ruthless international crime organization, survive Julian Thorn's treachery, and somehow keep my daughter alive and oblivious to the entire blood feud erupting around her marriage. I looked down at the briefcase full of damning evidence, then back at the burner phone. If I handed over the files, I was signing my death warrant. If I didn't, Chloe was gone. My hands flew to the laptop, powering up the encrypted files. There was only one way to survive this. I had to destroy both armies before they realized I was armed. I quickly accessed the main directory, my fingers flying across the keyboard, preparing to release every secret I held into the public domain. A financial scorched earth policy. Just as the system reached 90% upload confirmation for the global data dump, the outside security camera feed on my secondary monitor suddenly flickered to life, displaying the desolate, empty storage unit lot. The image was static for a moment, then violently distorted. The lights in the storage unit flickered once, twice, and died, plunging me into absolute darkness, followed instantly by the unmistakable sound of the heavy steel door being forced open. The darkness was total, thick and immediate, swallowing the weak glow from the laptop screen just as the upload hit 98%. The sound of the heavy steel door wasn't just the lock yielding, it was the screech of stressed metal, a sound of brute, impatient force. They hadn't bothered with finesse. They were here now, the Sterling Syndicate. They must have been monitoring the burner phone data stream just as closely as I was monitoring the upload progress. Julian Thorn hadn't just set a trap. He'd given them the precise coordinates. I could almost hear the smug satisfaction in Thorn's voice echoing from the previous day. "We'll assume you've chosen the wrong side." They had assumed wrong. I chose war, 99%. I snatched the encrypted laptop, ripping the external hard drive free just as the door shuddered violently again, hitting the frame with a sound that suggested several heavy bodies slamming against it. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but adrenaline, cold and pure, washed away the panic. This was familiar territory, the chaos I thought I'd escaped. I had seconds. The storage unit was a dead end, too small, too exposed. I scrambled toward the back wall where a flimsy partition separated my unit from the neighboring one, Unit 14B, 100%, upload confirmed. The secrets of the Sterling Syndicate, Julian Thorn's entire financial empire, and Marcus's impending IPO were currently being mirrored onto secure servers across 3 continents, timed to detonate in exactly 6 hours, moments after Chloe's wedding was scheduled to begin. I pulled a small, custom-made pry bar from the bottom of the empty briefcase. The partition wall was thin plywood, designed to deter casual snooping, not organized enforcement. I wedged the bar into the seam near the top corner and heaved. The wood groaned in protest. The main door burst inward with a catastrophic splintering sound, revealing harsh, tactical floodlights slicing through the gloom. Silhouetted against the lights were figures in dark tactical gear, armed, not just with sidearms. These were serious weapons, the kind used when the target is expected to fight back or already dead. "Stop right there! Drop the drive!" A synthesized voice barked through a voice modulator. I ignored them, leveraging the pry bar again, putting my entire weight into the movement. A piece of the drywall tore free, revealing the dusty darkness of Unit 14B. A burst of automatic fire ripped through the space where I'd been standing a second before. Shrapnel pinged off the metal shelving behind me as I threw myself through the ragged opening into the adjacent unit. The air in 14B smelled stale, metallic, and unused. I landed hard on my shoulder, rolling quickly to my feet, clutching the hard drive to my chest. I had no idea what was in 14B, but it was a gamble I had to take. My eyes, adjusting to the sudden shift from the external floodlights to near-total blackness, caught a faint glimmer, the outline of a large vehicle cover. I heard movement from the damaged doorway. The syndicate operatives were methodically sweeping my original unit before breaching 14B. They weren't rushing. They were cautious, professional, and knew exactly what I was capable of. They knew about the data dump. I fumbled blindly for the emergency flashlight clipped to my belt, managing to click it on. The narrow beam cut through the dust, illuminating the interior of 14B. It wasn't empty. In the center of the unit, covered by a heavy, dark green canvas tarp, was an object that took my breath away. It wasn't a motorcycle or old furniture. It was the unmistakable, streamlined shape of a high-performance, long-range snowmobile, the kind used for covert transport in deep mountain passes, the very model I had purchased under a false identity during my 18 months in the Swiss Alps. And next to the snowmobile, propped against the wall, was a single, familiar duffel bag. My emergency travel kit, the one I'd thought I'd lost during my flight from Europe a decade ago. The bag that contained my passport portfolio, several untraceable credit chips, and most importantly, the secure access key needed to remotely manage the offshore trust fund. How? How could the Sterling Syndicate have this unit, stocked with my most private escape tools, ready for me? A shadow fell across the entrance to 14B. The voice modulator crackled again, closer this time. No longer just a command, but a statement of fact. "We already anticipated your little contingency plan, Eleanor, and we've prepared a very nice ride for you. But first, we need the drive, and Julian Thorne wants a word. It seems your little wedding is about to get a lot more crowded than he planned." The tactical lights from the breach flooded 14B, standing just inside the ruined doorway, not among the armored operatives, but slightly apart, holding a satellite phone to his ear, was Julian Thorne himself. He looked utterly calm, his expensive suit untouched by the dust. "Did you really think you could leave us holding the bag, Eleanor?" Thorne asked, his voice now clear, stripped of the modulator. "I told you I knew exactly who you were, and I also know who you were running with in the Alps. The Sterling Syndicate sent their enforcement team, but they didn't account for the fact that I financed their entire security operation for the last 5 years. They're here for you, but they work for me now." He gestured to the heavily armed men who shifted their stance, no longer aiming solely at me, but clearly awaiting his next command, which felt perilously close to a death sentence for me, regardless of the hard drive's location. "You have one final choice, Eleanor Vance," Thorne continued, stepping further into the unit, his eyes fixed on the flickering progress bar on my still-running laptop screen. Hand over that drive, or I order my security, and Sterling's eager thugs to secure the evidence by eliminating the only person who knows how to decrypt it. The realization hit me with the force of the physical blows I was enduring, the agonizing burn in my shoulder, the stale air suffocating in my lungs. Julian Thorne hadn't simply anticipated my escape route. He controlled the very people pursuing me. He wasn't just playing both sides. He was both sides. He used the threat of the syndicate to leverage my expertise for his IPO. And then, realizing I was about to detonate his entire structure with the data dump, he was arranging for my permanent silence, using the syndicate's own muscle to clean up his mess. The upload bar finally hit 100%. The data was gone. Free. In that split second, my fear crystallized into absolute final clarity. If I handed over the drive, they would still kill me to ensure no loose ends remained before Chloe's wedding. If I fought, I died here, and the syndicate would still have enough information to tie the fallout to Chloe, ruining her life anyway. There was only one outcome left: mutually assured destruction. "You're right, Julian," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, projecting across the small, tense space. I held up the portable hard drive, letting the weak beam of my flashlight catch the metallic gleam. "You do know exactly who I am, and you know I never leave anything behind." I didn't move toward him. Instead, I brought the hard drive down sharply against the corner of the reinforced steel frame of the snowmobile chassis, a precise practice strike aimed at the volatile, exposed circuitry beneath the casing. The impact didn't cause a detonation, but it caused something far worse in this confined space: an electromagnetic pulse, localized and vicious. The lights in the storage unit, the powerful tactical beams the syndicate men held, flickered violently and died. The satellite phone in Julian Thorne's hand went dead with a faint electronic whine. The encrypted laptops and comm systems carried by the operatives instantly sputtered into useless silence. In the sudden, echoing darkness, the highly professional syndicate team was reduced to panicked, disoriented figures stumbling around their now useless equipment. "What was that?" Thorne roared, his cultivated calm finally shattered. "That," I said, my voice now utilizing the tactical earpiece still secured in my ear, a piece of tech that relied on its own independent power source, bypassing Thorne's localized EMP, was the sound of every backdoor, every hidden ledger, and every offshore account Julian Thorne thought he controlled being publicly broadcast. I didn't wait for confirmation. I snatched the heavy tarp off the snowmobile. It was primed, fueled, and ready. I jumped on, kicking the starter. The engine roared to life, a deafening, deep-throated bellow that echoed painfully in the closed concrete space, overriding the shouts of the confused gunmen. I threw the machine into gear, pointing the narrow nose directly at the ruined doorway. "The Sterling files are public, Julian," I yelled over the engine noise, "and Chloe's wedding is still on. But now, your entire empire implodes before the vows are exchanged." I didn't look back. I hit the throttle. The powerful machine shot forward, smashing through the flimsy remains of the interior partition, then obliterating the weakened door frame entirely. I burst out of Unit 14A and into the brightly lit aisle of the storage facility, the syndicate operatives firing blindly into the darkness behind me, hitting nothing but concrete and dust. I navigated the maze of parked units, the snowmobile oddly nimble. I discarded the useless, blinking hard drive out the side as I rounded a corner, ensuring they'd have nothing tangible to seize immediately. When I finally burst through the main facility exit and onto the street, the pre-dawn chill hit my face. I kept the engine running, knowing I couldn't stop. I needed distance, and I needed to see my daughter one last time before the world dissolved into chaos. I checked my watch. 5:15 a.m. The wedding was scheduled for 11 a.m. I drove the snowmobile, a ridiculously conspicuous vehicle for city streets, like a fugitive, sticking to side roads, heading towards Oak Haven Hill. I ditched the machine in a muddy ravine a mile from the Thorne Estate perimeter fence, retrieved my emergency travel bag, the one with the untraceable chips, and moved into the dense woods bordering the property. The Thorne Estate was already buzzing with activity, lights ablaze. Wedding preparations were in full swing. I scaled the perimeter fence with practiced ease, moving like a shadow through the manicured darkness of the estate grounds. I reached the main house just as the morning light began to paint the sky soft shades of rose and gold. Chloe's bridal suite was on the second floor, facing the extensive gardens where the ceremony was set to take place. I found a vantage point hidden behind a massive rhododendron bush near the veranda, close enough to see the activity, far enough to remain unseen. A flurry of movement in the master bedroom window caught my eye. Chloe. She was standing in her white silk robe, looking utterly radiant, speaking softly on the phone, smiling. She looked happy. Safe. Then the digital detonation began. My encrypted upload timer hit 0. It wasn't a single explosion, it was a targeted, systematic collapse. News alerts began flashing across every illuminated screen, visible from my vantage point. The security detail stationed near the main drive suddenly snapped to attention, their composure instantly gone as they checked their own devices. Julian Thorne's face, pale, furious, and utterly defeated, appeared on the enormous flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace in the main drawing room, visible through the grand floor-to-ceiling windows. He was being interviewed live, surrounded by panicked lawyers. The anchor was breathlessly reporting on the complete collapse of Thorne Industries' IPO, citing massive, untraceable outflows of funds and immediate federal investigations triggered by anonymous international filings. The Thornes were ruined. Their empire was gone before their son could say, "I do." I watched as Chloe, seeing the panic erupt below, rushed to the window, peering down. She looked confused, then alarmed as she saw her fiancé, Marcus, being aggressively pulled away from the florist by his mother, both of them screaming at Julian. Chloe turned back into the room, her face etched with confusion, then a dawning horror as she looked at her phone, likely reading the same headlines erupting across the world. Just then, a heavy older woman, Marcus's mother, the matriarch who had so carefully curated this perfect union, stormed into Chloe's room. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't ask if Chloe was all right. She marched straight to Chloe, grabbed her arm, and hissed something terrible. Something about scandal and your criminal mother finally catching up to you. Chloe looked utterly broken. She pulled her arm free, shaking her head, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the true nature of the rejection she'd inflicted upon me. Then Chloe looked directly out the window, straight toward the rhododendron bush, straight at me. Her eyes widened, not with recognition, but with a desperate, pleading question. She didn't know who I was, but she sensed a witness to her devastation. And in that moment, I realized something far more chilling than the financial ruin. Julian Thorne had lost the battle for his empire, but he hadn't lost the war for control. His men were gone, his reputation destroyed, but he still had one immediate leverage point left against the remaining players. As Chloe stared at me, trapped in the wreckage of her dream wedding, I saw a movement near the edge of the property where the syndicate's enforcers had been forced to retreat. They hadn't been captured or arrested. They were regrouping near the perimeter fence, the same fence I had just scaled. And this time, they weren't looking at me. They were looking at the house. Chloe's wedding was officially canceled, but the real danger, the one that had followed me across oceans, was now converging on the one person Julian Thorne knew I couldn't abandon. I had burned the world down to save her, but now, standing outside the flames, I realized I had only succeeded in drawing the predators directly to her doorstep. I had mere seconds before the syndicate's backup arrived, and Chloe was standing right there, visible in the bright, shattering light of her ruined morning.